Medicine can't even correct the common cold. So if you're oxygenating your brain,
you can't be depressed.
No, you can't.
AIDS and cancer.
Oh, God, yeah.
It improves eyesight. It improves hearing.
It breaks up the garbage in our bodies. Anti-tumoral, immunostimulant. What do we need in our lives today?
Frankincense.
Yeah, antidepressant, bronchitis, asthma, ulcers. Then there's CANCER. Enhances the entire body function.
Modulate the immune system, regulate blood glucose, modulate hormones, fight cancer.
Store that emotion in the liver. We also store it in fat cells, and that's why some of us, have a little extra. Ebola virus and the hepatitis,
Early childhood trauma.
and tuberculosis.
Do you hear that, medical schools here? Please tune in.
We are down here to discover new oils.
Today, we'll be discussing the case of Donald Gary Young, who I will be referring to as Gary in this video. Gary was a businessman and an entrepreneur. While he did eventually become successful, he unfortunately had some rough moments in his early life. As a young adult, he ended up suffering a near-fatal accident, and this accident supposedly left him unable to walk for many years. But despite the trauma he endured from this incident, Gary was able to develop a new outlook on life. It was from this incident that he was able to discover his new passions and eventually found the infamous company Young Living Essential Oils. He opened up so many clinics, he wrote several books, many people looked up to Gary, and he was able to grow this brand into one of the top multi-level marketing companies across the world. But despite appearing to be what people considered a doctor and an authority regarding treatment and medicine, many people didn't know the reality of how he came to become the big name that he was. Because it turns out that Gary had quite the lengthy criminal history, because not only did he falsely diagnose people, but he was full on practicing medicine on patients, no matter how sick they were, without a medical license. From how he was promoted and advertised, many were convinced that his methods of treatment through alternative medicine practices were the answer to their ailments, that he could cure serious diseases, that with his methods he could treat cancer. And he continued opening up clinics all around the world, advertising that he was able to treat such conditions before authorities were truly able to get onto him. But what's wild is that not only did he practice his treatment methods on patients who were ill that he didn't know, but he was also practicing these methods on his own family. In fact, it was because of one incident in particular that authorities truly started looking into what was going on behind closed doors in his clinics. And it was this particular incident that would kickstart the string of crimes that Gary would soon commit against those who were the most vulnerable. This case was actually recommended by a subscriber, so thank you so much for suggesting this case. And just to introduce myself, my name is Petal Palmer, and on this channel I post anything involving medical mysteries and crime. If that is something that sounds interesting to you, please consider subscribing if you end up liking this video. But before we hop into today's case, I'd like to take a minute to thank the sponsor of this portion of today's video, Wild Deodorant. Now, before my cancer diagnosis, I already had pretty dry skin, but once I started chemo, my skin got so dry to the point it just started flaking. Now, it's not hard to tell I love plants, and I've always been one to, at the very least, try my best to do small things that are beneficial to the environment, so I was actually very excited when Wild reached out to collaborate with me. Wild uses natural ingredients, they're cruelty-free, and they're vegan. What's cool is that you're able to get your own reusable case and then just get compostable refills for their deodorants. It's actually said that for every time you get a refill, you're saving 30 grams worth of plastic. And you can even personalize your case with your own name. Mine just says Petal at the top, and I just think it's so cute. Also, you can get a smaller one for on the go, which is really nice. The scents they have are also really good. Fresh cotton and sea salt is especially my favorite. And something I really like is that for every purchase you make with them, they plant a tree as part of a partnership with an organization called On a Mission. I really enjoy that it's just a simple way to contribute to the environment and be more sustainable in just smaller and easier steps. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend checking them out. I do have a discount code. If you use the code PETAL20, you can get 20% off your entire order from Wild. You can get the discount by scanning the QR code on the screen, but you can also find the link in the description below. The code is limited time only and doesn't last too long, so I'd be sure to use it as soon as possible if you'd like to place an order. Again, thank you Wild for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now let's hop right into this case. Donald Gary Young was born July 11th, 1949 in Idaho Falls, Idaho to parents Donald Norman Young and Dolly Adrienne Parsons. He had 5 living siblings. He did have another sibling, a sister, who passed away as an infant, and out of all of his siblings, he was the second oldest. He grew up pretty poor. He and his family lived in a very small cabin on a ranch in the mountains of Idaho. Their cabin was 20 by 30 feet, and in their cabin, they had no running water and no electricity. So you can imagine in the winters, it must have been very cold in this cabin because Idaho is one of the colder states in the US. They lived on a ranch. A ranch is essentially a typically large farm, and it was on this ranch where his father would raise grain, hay, and livestock, while his mother would work as a part-time employee at the local drugstore. Now, Gary grew up in a Mormon household. He and his family were very religious, and he remained a devout Christian for pretty much his whole life. This does play a significant role later on in this case when discussing a lot about the beliefs he had regarding his company. Gary attended high school in Challis, Idaho. Challis is a city with a lot of mountains and rivers and is typically a place people go to if they want to do any type of outdoor activities like camping or hiking. And he did love the outdoors. Being outdoors and being in nature was something he connected with. So much so, it was actually a lifelong dream of his to one day own his very own ranch on the Canada frontier. And he planned on doing whatever he needed to do to achieve that goal. So to start this off, after he graduated high school on May 23rd, 1967, at 17 years old, he began working for the U.S. Forest Service. The U.S. Forest Service is essentially an agency responsible for managing public lands in the states. It oversees 155 national forests, 20 grasslands, and 1 tall grass prairie. So many of the jobs and careers somehow relate to sustaining the national lands and forests in the country. And he excelled there. He actually was doing such a good job. He was written a letter of recommendation and was offered a scholarship to attend the U.S. Forestry Service School, also known as Forestry Tech, located in Boise, Idaho. Though despite this amazing offer, Gary had other things on his mind. He actually only briefly worked with the U.S. Forest Service because it wasn't too long after, in February 1968, when he packed his stuff up in his truck and moved up to British Columbia, Canada, not only to pursue his goal, but to also begin a career in logging. Logging is the practice of cutting and moving trees for local transport, and a job like this was nothing new to him. He grew up on a farm, so he was accustomed to working hard and working jobs like this. And he went through the next few years seemingly just chilling and enjoying the work he was doing. He was able to do this move as he was granted a good amount of land to do it and live there. Gary was given 320 acres of land in the Caribou district of BC as part of the last Homestead Act, which was an act which granted applicants ownership of these things called homesteads. Homesteads were described as areas of public land in the Western Territories, and homesteading as a lifestyle is described as a kind where one lives in a self-sufficient way. It relies on being able to utilize agriculture and land to live. Instead of living very industrialized with shopping and buying things, with homesteading, you would often grow your own food, you'd use canned or preserved food, use solar energy to power your home, and you can even make your own clothes. The Homestead Act of 1862 was essentially an incentive for several people to settle in the Western Territories in the States, as the government would advertise these areas as free land as long as you apply and were approved. A similar act was also later adopted by Canada as the Dominion Lands Act of 1872, and this act attracted immigrants from all around the world to Western Canada. So a lot of people were interested in applying and were willing to do this move because they would be granted all of these acres of land to live on, essentially for free. It said that 160 acres of land only cost people $10. The only thing was, with these homesteads, is that you were given the land, but you still had to build your own home, gather your own resources, and most of the time, a lot of people were moving away and were being separated from their friends and relatives, and you had less access to things. And with building your own home, you had to do this within the first 3 years of you being there. However, it was described that Gary wanted to live a life of homesteading, and that lifestyle did feel feel like home or pretty natural for him. And it was just 2 months later, in April 1968, when he ended up meeting someone who shared the same interest in this homesteading lifestyle as he did. And this woman was named Donna Jean. Donna Jean was a Canadian citizen. She and Gary ended up meeting at the homestead in BC, and they quickly fell in love. It wasn't too long after they met, just 6 months later in October that year, when they ended up getting married. And throughout the years, they would end up having a total of 6 children together, 2 daughters, and 4 sons. And they truthfully just continued living their lives as a young family on this homestead. That was, however, until 6 years later when something very traumatic happened that would soon completely change Gary's life. In February 1973, when Gary was just 24 years old, he got into a very bad logging accident, and it nearly took his life. What happened was he had woken up, gotten out of his bed, and prepared for his normal day of work in logging. When he arrived at work, everything started normally. He was doing his work as usual. Now, I'm not sure exactly what he was doing when this exact moment happened, but while he was logging, one of the trees had fallen on him. Now, we're going to talk about his other wives a little later, but his third wife, Mary Young, wrote about Gary's life in a book, and she described the outcome of this accident. She said how in this accident, Gary suffered 19 broken bones, 3 open skull fractures, 16 crushed vertebrae, 11 ruptured discs, a broken pelvis, and his spinal cord was herniated in 2 different places. So he was rushed to the hospital, his family was eventually called, and his surgeons actually told his parents that, quote, if a butcher had taken a meat cleaver and gone down the right side of his body and sheared off every bone, he couldn't have done a better job than the tree that hit him. It was actually so bad, he was left in a coma for 3 weeks. And while staying in the hospital, he ended up getting meningitis, which is an infection affecting the membranes covering the brain and the spinal cord. Although he did eventually recover from the meningitis and did fortunately wake up from this coma, he still had a very long way to go in his recovery. To manage the physical pain for 3 straight years, Gary had to regularly take morphine. And for 7 years, he regularly had to use different forms of oxycodone and codeine. His whole lower body was paralyzed, and he had to be confined to a wheelchair, and he was told he would never be able to walk again. This was really hard for him because for his whole life, he was always working hard and just doing physically demanding things. From growing up on a farm, raising livestock, doing logging, he was so used to doing these physical tasks. So now being in a wheelchair and being unable to do these tasks the same way he was able to do them before, this was something that was hard for him to adjust to. It was so bad, he was becoming depressed and began falling into a very bad place mentally. And because of this depression, for those 7 years, he was also taking many antidepressants, which unfortunately didn't do too much for him because he was still having really horrible thoughts and he didn't want to live that way anymore. This is just a trigger warning of self-harm. They described that he apparently tried to take his life on 3 different occasions, with the 3rd time being done as an attempt to starve himself by only drinking lemon juice and water. This was to no avail, and he was still stuck attempting to recover. That, of course, though, was until a little after a year from his accident, 253 days after to be exact, when it was described that something quite miraculous happened. One day, Gary woke up and it was a normal day for him when suddenly he began feeling a sensation he hadn't felt in a very long time, because he started feeling some kind of movement in his right toe. And he, of course, got excited because he was told that he would not be able to walk again. This gave him some hope that maybe this statement wasn't as true as he thought it was. And it was just that next year, 27 months after being in his wheelchair, when his hopes started falling in place, because he finally began learning how to walk again. But Mary also described in the book that while this was a miraculous moment, this also stemmed Gary's mistrust in medical professionals, because he was shocked to see that doctors told him that he couldn't ever walk again and that he would have to stay confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, when he was standing right there and walking after all those years of going through this recovery. But interestingly enough, he was attributing that recovery to the long time he spent fasting. It was said that during those 253 days, Gary supposedly survived by drinking nothing but lemon water, and that it was because of this fasting that he was able to get back healthy again. However, This accident and his recovery is where we reach the first controversy many have pointed out in this case. In court documents, it confirms that Gary was in fact involved in a logging accident, that it did occur in February, and that it was serious. However, it says that he was just in the hospital until June of that year, and that he only used his wheelchair from June to October that year, and that he was back to walking on crutches from November that year. That is only 4 months of being in the wheelchair, which is a stark difference from the over 2 years that was described. Not only this, but during those 4 months, not only was he making this recovery, but he also began studying again. He enrolled in a home study correspondence course in nutrition and herbology, and more specifically was focusing on learning about degenerative diseases and body rejuvenation. And not too shortly after, in December, he was back to working again. Now, he wasn't back to logging just yet, but he was working as a part-time chip truck driver at a company called Schmidt Lumber located in Vernon, BC. And it was only a few months later, in February 1974, when Schmidt Lumber moved him from driving the chip trucks to driving a logging truck. So he was slowly getting back involved in working in the logging industry. In fact, shortly after this in May, he ended up buying his own logging truck and he began working as an independent logging truck driver, which too didn't last very long because it was only that next month in June when the woodworkers had gone on strike. So there was essentially no work for Gary to do at that time, and he needed to find something else to be able to earn some money. This is when he went into the cargo transportation business and moved back to the States to begin working for a company called Linden Transport. It was there where he would haul various cargo from Seattle all the way to Alaska. And just a few months later, in December, he ended up moving even further because Linden ended up transferring him to Fairbanks, Alaska in order to work on their pipeline. This lasted until 1976 when the pipeline was finished and Gary moved back to Canada working as a truck driver between Alberta and British Columbia. However, this also only lasted briefly because he ended up selling his truck in February 1977 in order to get back to logging again. He started working as an independent contractor, working at different private firms, and did this for only about 2 years because in 1979, he yet again got into another logging accident. This one not as serious, but still concerning enough to just wrap it up and start doing something elsewhere. And this something else he decided to do was go back to school. He moved to California in order to study nutrition, color therapy, and reflexology. Reflexology is an alternative medicine practice, also known as zone therapy, which involves the application of pressure to specific points of the feet, the hands, and ears in order to cause physical changes to supposed related body parts. It's described on Wikipedia as a gentle manipulation or pressing on certain parts of the foot to produce an effect elsewhere in the body. He went to somewhere called the Burroughs VitaFlex Institute located in Sacramento, California, and it was there where he received the certification in reflexology. The only thing about this institute was that it was an unaccredited school. In fact, it was named after and dedicated to the teachings of a man named Stanley Burroughs. And Stanley Burroughs was actually convicted of second-degree murder and felony charges in 1981 after he was caught practicing medicine without a license. He was treating a patient for cancer without actually being a licensed physician. And even though this patient passed away from his treatment, his homicide conviction actually ended up being overturned after he appealed. Even though Gary enrolled in this school just before Stanley was convicted, regardless, before that all happened, he was essentially learning teachings from a man who had a patient pass away in his care after illegally treating them. So this kind of gives an idea of what could be expected in the way he was practicing his medicine. From 1979 up until 1981, he also completed his nutrition studies at the Donsbach Nutrition University located in Huntington Beach, California. And again, it was an unaccredited school. Lastly, on his list of personal achievements, he claimed to have earned a doctorate in naturopathy from the Bernardine University between 1982 and 1985, which again is an unaccredited university and also just not true. He's never earned a doctorate in anything. After he completed this, he and Donna Jean moved to Spokane, Washington, where he began studying at the American Institute for Physiogeneralogy under a man named Michael Maher, who founded and operated the Institute. It was there where he enrolled in a therapeutic massage program. However, in 1986, the founder of the Institute claimed that Gary didn't stay in the program for too long, as he allegedly left after attending only a few classes, doing a third of the homework, and owing Maher $1,800 in tuition. So he never got a certification from the school, which would have made sense because it was in June of 1981 when both Gary and Donna Jean decided to open up a clinic with an herb shop and nutrition center in Spokane. So if he did end up dropping out, it was likely because he was putting in the time to get this shop up and running, especially because it was also around this time when they found out some very serious news regarding Donna Jean's health. And this health complication was a pivotal moment in the growth of this brand. Just when the clinic opened up, Donna Jean had gone in to an appointment to see a doctor, and she found out that she had a malignant tumor in her thyroid. After finding this out, the doctor was like, look, I think we need to do a surgery to remove the tumor, but Donna Jean was like, I don't know. Like, she was very hesitant because a surgery, especially one in your thyroid, can't be an easy thing to go through. And I'm sure it didn't help that, like I mentioned, Gary was already a little hesitant towards medical professionals. So the two of them sat down and discussed, like, what should we do? What are the best options for me to go through? And this is when Gary was like, you know what? I know what we need to do. I'm going to write you up a nutrition program, and this is what we're going to do to treat your tumor and see if it'll help. So that's exactly what they did. Gary created the program and Donna Jean was diligently following it. I'm not exactly sure what this program consisted of, but what is confirmed is that throughout this program, Donna Jean began losing a lot of weight that she had gained from the tumor. And it was only just a few months after beginning this program when the tumor had completely disappeared and Donna Jean was in full remission. No symptoms, no tumors, just everything completely gone. Now, when this happened, word got around everywhere. Everyone was talking about and spreading the news of how this woman had this tumor, but was suddenly healthy after following this unknown nutrition program that her husband created. And this is when many customers started coming into their shop and inquiring about how that even happened. People were very shocked and they wanted to know what this nutrition program was. They were asking them for advice on what natural treatments they could do, and they were hoping that they could use these to treat various diseases like cancer or multiple sclerosis. They'd actually gotten so many inquiries, there came a point where just doing consultations was a full-time job at this shop. Despite the traffic that was coming to the shop, Gary still had some academic goals he wanted to achieve. Clearly, he seemed to have this knack for treating diseases, and so much so, it was no surprise that he enrolled in some pre-med courses with hopes to go to med school. He did these classes at Spokane Community College during the spring of 1982 to pursue these hopes of his. And this is where some of the major issues from the case also started, because despite only being what they described as a pre-med student, there was speculation that Gary might have been doing some practices that he was not yet qualified for at all. And this was because of a tragic incident that occurred during the birth of he and Donna Jean's 7th child. By September of 1982, Donna Jean was nearing the end of her 7th pregnancy after already having 6 children with Gary. Now, at the time, Gary and Donna Jean's last 4 children were ages 9, 5, 3, and 2. And Gary happened to deliver all 4 of them underwater without the help of a doctor or any medical professional. In fact, he even supervised the delivery of another baby earlier that year in April. And yet again, he was going to be delivering their 7th child, who would later be born and be named Rachel. He believed that giving birth underwater was beneficial for babies because he thought that it immunized them against all sorts of diseases. So on that day Rachel was born, once Donna Jean went into labor, Gary brought her into a health club that he operated in Washington, and they were going to be doing this birth in a whirlpool. So Donna Jean got all situated in this whirlpool, Gary got to delivering, and Rachel came out a healthy baby girl. However, it wasn't too long after this birth when she started to experience some complications, and they ended up rushing her to the emergency room at the Deaconess Hospital. Baby Rachel was not breathing, and doctors had no luck reviving her. And it was only 2.5 hours after she was born when she was pronounced dead at the hospital, with the cause of death being attributed to cardiac arrest. Now, even though nobody was charged with the passing of Rachel, state authorities were still quite suspicious of Gary. Rachel was a seemingly healthy baby girl. There were no issues with her, so it was just odd that she just passed away from cardiac arrest. Not only this, but apparently somebody had made an allegation that Gary was in fact delivering other babies without medical help. And this was brought to the attention of the coroner. That is when the Spokane Police Department launched an undercover investigation against Gary, led by healthcare practice investigator Terry Patton and Detective Denise Coker. On Tuesday, February 22nd, 1983, investigator Terry and Detective Denise contacted Gary, pretending to be a married couple, with Denise being 7 to 9 weeks pregnant. During this call, Terry was like, "Hey, my wife is pregnant and will probably be going into labor soon. We had some difficulties with our first delivery, and so I was wondering if you had some alternative ways you could do to deliver our child." And when Gary responded, to Terry's surprise, he declined. He said that he would not be doing that. So that's when Terry was like, "Oh, okay, well, would you possibly be able to discuss some alternative methods of delivering a child that you might know?" And Gary replied, "Yeah, that's fine. I'll tell you some options that I know about." So the three of them arranged to meet 2 days later on Thursday, the 24th. They all met up, introduced themselves, and they started this discussion regarding these alternative delivery methods. Throughout the entire conversation, there were 3 instances in which Terry had asked Gary if he would be willing to deliver the baby. And each time Terry asked, Gary refused and was like, "No, I won't be doing that." He, however, explained that while he was not a doctor, he did have a master's degree in nutrition. He even claimed that he was a graduate from the American Institute of Physiogenerology, even though this was false because, like stated before, he dropped out and still owed tuition to the owner. But because of these qualifications that he deemed and claimed that he had, he told them that he would be able to offer prenatal examinations for Denise and said that he would be able to advise her throughout the pregnancy. He told them that for about $750, he would be able to monitor her blood throughout the pregnancy, and that by doing this, he'd be able to prescribe an adequate nutrition plan for Denise to follow. So they all seemingly agreed to go through with this monitoring plan, and this conversation eventually led them to discussing the topic of degenerative diseases, specifically cancer. At some point, Terry was like, "Hey, you know what? My mother-in-law actually has cancer, and we were curious about ways we could possibly treat it." This is when Gary was like, "Oh, I know all about treating cancer, especially because my wife just had a malignant tumor and now she's cured with the treatment protocol that I had her on." So Terry and Denise were like, oh my gosh, oh wow, that's amazing. Like, could you tell me what we could do? This is when Gary began discussing things like diet, therapy, vitamins, enzymes, minerals, using vitamin B17. And he was saying how all of these could be used in place as alternatives instead of surgery and chemotherapy, as he allegedly was describing how chemotherapy is bad for you and that they shouldn't do it at all for cancer. These were just some of the thoughts that he had. So Denise and Terry, they nodded their head. They seemed to be agreeing with whatever it was Gary recommended. And then they were like, "Awesome, like what are the next steps that we should do? And what steps should we take for Denise's treatment program for her pregnancy?" And so Gary told them about how in Salt Lake City, Utah, that he actually had a special lab that specialized in the analysis of blood samples in order to figure out what he could prescribe to Denise for her pregnancy. He said that this blood test was supposedly able to determine body deterioration, organ malfunction, and compatibility for different foods or food supplements to determine whether someone might be allergic to something or not, and that doing this would allow him to make a proper prescription for her. All he said that they needed was a blood sample and a hair sample in order to conduct these tests. And so Terry and Denise were like, "Oh wow, okay, that's so cool. Like, would we be able to get a blood test over there?" And Gary was like, "Absolutely. Like, you can most definitely go over there and get a test." So they went ahead and booked an appointment for the blood test at this specialized lab. Now, this appointment that was booked apparently was not going to initially be done at the lab in Salt Lake City, but instead was going to be done with Gary. Gary explained to them that he had a policy and that it was not to take the blood sample himself, but that what they needed to do was instead use a syringe that was used for those with diabetes that Gary provided for them to extract it themselves, and then return the syringe to Gary in order for him to forward it to the lab in Salt Lake City. So confusing little process. When the day came for them to go in for the sample, Gary did come out and with the syringe and was like, hey, like, you're going to use this and get out the blood sample. So Terry was like, awesome, thanks. We'll do it in a bit. I just really need to use the restroom right now. I'll be back in a second. And Gary was like, okay, cool. That's fine. So Terry left the room, and to Gary, he seemingly was heading to the restroom. However, Terry did not need to use the restroom, and he was not heading there at all. He, in fact, left the room and he immediately called the police because with Gary trying to collect this blood sample from him, he now had evidence indicating that he was trying to illegally practice medicine. So shortly after Terry called, the police arrived and Gary was arrested for practicing medicine without a license. He eventually pleaded guilty and he was sentenced to 1 year of probation, while also being ordered to not engage in any medicine practicing in the state of Washington. He was ordered to not violate similar licensing laws in other states, and he was sentenced to serve 60 days in the Spokane County Jail, which was later suspended. In fact, remember how he and Donna Jean's newborn Rachel passed away from supposed cardiac arrest 2.5 hours after she was born? Well, it turns out it was later discovered during this investigation that during the birth, Gary actually held Rachel underwater for a whole entire hour. And this was because he apparently thought that since she was still attached to the umbilical cord, that this would be okay. So baby Rachel truly passed away from oxygen deprivation. Now, despite being on probation, Gary was still committed to continuing services in the health industry. That same year, throughout his probation in 1983, he opened up a health company in the San Diego area. And it was there where he began selling products like vitamins, extracts, mouthwash, these things called colima boards, colonic trips, which appear to be devices used to cleanse one's colon. And he even sold a book written by Stanley Burroughs, who, like mentioned, was the man that was charged with second-degree murder after falsely treating a cancer patient without a license. But also, in addition to selling these products, he also opened up a clinic. And unsurprisingly, this clinic claimed to specialize in the treatment of various degenerative diseases. But get this clinic was not opened up in the San Diego area or anywhere where he's done his practices before, because he actually opened up this clinic in Tijuana, Mexico, and it was named the Rosarita Beach Clinic. On the brochure of this Rosarita Beach Clinic, he had himself listed as the medical director, and he claimed that the reason he ended up opening it in Mexico was due to the fact that he was receiving, quote, harassment from the Orthodox medical profession. It was around this time when Gary and Donna Jean ended up divorcing from one another, and Gary moved to Mexico to continue working on this clinic of his, while Donna Jean moved back to Canada with all of the children that she and Gary had with each other. She and the children moved into low-income housing in Canada, and Donna Jean ended up having to work several jobs to be able to provide for all 6 of their children. Gary didn't seem to be around too much, as one of his children, Matthew, who was an infant at the time, described how they'd often go years without seeing their father. Because while Donna Jean was doing what she could to raise their children, Gary seemed to be pursuing his path of practicing alternative medicine, no matter how far he had to go in order to do it. And he seemingly was ready to move on right after his divorce, because it was only shortly after when he married his second wife, Dixie, who he was with while running this clinic in Mexico. It was at this clinic where he presented himself as a naturopathic doctor, despite not completing the program. And it was there where he was offering a variety of interesting and very non-traditional treatment methods for the detoxification of diseases like cancer and lupus. Just to list a few, he was offering bioelectrical cell activator therapy, blood crystallization tests, live cell analysis, and detoxification programs, like mentioned. He was also administering IVs and doing intramuscular injections of vitamins, minerals, and something called thymus extracts. He claimed to have quite the unique treatment method for cancer. In 1987, he was offering a 21-day program to treat cancer, and for patients, this program cost $6,500 US at the time, which is equivalent to $15,000 US in 2020. In addition, the room and board cost $280 a week. It was also reported in the Times that the detoxification program at the clinic, which consists of colonics, a special diet, and various nostrums, cost $2,000 per week, payable in advance. An at-home program is also available for $90 plus, about $400 worth of vitamins and supplements that Young sells through his vitamin company in California. His cancer program consisted of utilizing solutions such as amino acids, hydrogen peroxide, and even something called laetrile. And laetrile is a substance which has been proven to not only be a fraudulent and ineffective cancer treatment, but it's also proven to be very dangerous. Laetrile was first used as a cancer treatment in Russia in 1845, and then in the States in the 1920s. Its name is often used interchangeably with vitamin B17 and amygdalin, but these compounds are actually not the same at all. In the US, laetrile is a semi-synthetic derivative of amygdalin. However, in Mexico, it's a compound produced by crushed apricot pits. The concern with this as a treatment is the fact that laetrile contains high levels of cyanide, and so it was banned as it raised risk for cyanide poisoning. Its use is actually banned in both the United States and in Canada. The FDA banned it in the 1980s, and its sale was even banned by the European Commission as well. A lot of people who were practicing alternative medicine even after these bans still believed that hydrogen cyanide was an effective method to treating cancer cells. Remember how I mentioned Gary's religious belief being a devout Christian played a role on how he viewed his products and treatment methods? Well, that could be a plausible explanation for why he would have wanted to use something like laetrile despite the harmful side effects. In a blog post posted on his website on August 11th, 2014, he actually said, quote, "I can take you all around the world, and whatever exists, God created a plan for it. He created the plants for every condition, but what do? We turn to chemicals that poison and kill us, not to his life-giving substances." So I guess because laetrile could be produced by using crushed fruit pits, a lot of the alternative medicine followers, including Gary, must have viewed this as a natural treatment method and automatically deemed it as safe or better than something such as chemo, despite the fact that high levels of cyanide is not good for you at all. And a lot of the time, the patients requesting these services were often desperate or just vulnerable, going through a horrible disease like cancer and just trying to do what they could to get rid of it and be able to live. And it wasn't just cancer he was claiming he could treat, but he was also claiming that he could treat things like multiple sclerosis, arthritis, cardiovascular disease, lupus, and various other debilitating conditions. And that with his services, he was able to identify 34 different medical conditions, including stress, bowel gases, hypoglycemia, fluid retention, leukemia, multiple sclerosis, parasites, and immune deficiency. That was, however, until authorities were onto him yet again, because it was in 1988 when a complaint was filed against Gary in the state of California for alleged unfair, deceptive, untrue, and misleading advertising and unlawful, unfair, and fraudulent business practices. While running the clinic in Mexico, Gary had opened a clinic and company located in Chula Vista, California, which was operated by him, Dixie, and a man named Richard Crow Jr. This was called the Young Life Wellness Center and Young Life Products. Because of the suspicions surrounding him regarding false advertising and a sale of unapproved medical devices, they launched an investigation against him, which was conducted by a female investigator working for California's Department of Health Services. This This investigator went into the Young Life clinic and she had purchased a blood recrystallization test kit from them. She did, in fact, take a sample of her blood and submitted it back to the clinic. However, when she handed it in, she pretended as if the sample was from a man that she knew and that she was just handing it in for him, when in reality, the blood was fully from her. So she gave them the test and waited for the results to come back, seemingly not expecting there to be anything wrong with her blood as she had no known health issues at that time. However, when the results came back to her surprise, the clinic found in her blood sample, amongst other ailments, that she had an enlarged prostate and that carcinogenic cells existed in a potentially aggressive pattern. Now, this made no sense, and not because these health issues just weren't true, but because of the simple fact that the prostate is a male gland. Prostate is not found in females, so it was quite literally impossible for her to have an enlarged prostate because guess what? She didn't have one. Not only this, but supposedly a reporter for the LA Times also conducted their own investigation of the Rosarita clinic, and this also gave them very questionable results. This reporter apparently went to the clinic for a blood test, but instead of giving their own sample, they gave a sample from a cat in a chicken's blood. And when the employee came back with the results, she told the reporter that they had an aggressive type of cancer and liver disease. Now, when this reporter brought this same sample to a real doctor, this doctor was immediately questioning whether it was even human blood. Yet the employee at the Rosarita defended herself by saying that she's never dealt with animal blood before, so based on the sample, it looks like the cat must have had leukemia or been a carrier of leukemia. But that theory was of course disproved because the cat was fully healthy, had no leukemia, nor was a carrier of it. So that kind of just gave an idea of how legitimate these services were. So after the investigation, there was a temporary restraining order issued against the clinic for advertising and selling misleading products and health cures. And they were to be scheduled for a preliminary injunction, which was eventually issued by a judge in June 1988. The complaint filed against the three of them was due to their sale of unapproved medical devices and drugs, sale of manufactured medical devices and drugs without a license, as well as false advertising that their devices could do things like cure cancer and various other diseases. Some of these treatments included doing things like implanting electrodes into cancerous tumors, as well as doing things like reinfusing electrically treated blood. They did this despite A, not being licensed to do so, and B, having his practices debunked by medical professionals. Scott Browning, who is one of the physicians working in the hematology oncology department at Gary's Medical Center in San Diego, even claimed, quote, "The techniques described have no basis in rational scientific thought and are completely hogwash in my opinion," when regarding Gary's practices, and said they are by far closer to mysticism than medicine in my opinion, with a family practitioner from San Diego, Mitsuo Tamita, agreeing with that statement, regarding a video of Gary saying, quote, "We are led to believe Young is a medical doctor. In the videotape, he carries a stethoscope around his neck, is said to administer intravenous, intramuscular, and radiation treatments, implant catheters, and either grows or surgically rebuilds noses. We are led to believe that he is a medical doctor, yet his comments lack a lot of medical or scientific or logical content. In summary, the material reviewed is worthless, deceptive, illogical, and dangerous. With the Deputy District Attorney also saying the same and confirming that Gary was not a licensed physician in any of the United States. Prosecutors were hoping to charge Gary $2,500 for any violation proved in court, with a minimum fine of $150,000 for the three of them. However, this case was eventually settled that next year in 1989, and there's no information on whether they were penalized financially for this. That same year, in 1989, he also received a third lawsuit in the Superior Court of California for San Diego, and this lawsuit was filed from a former employee who worked at the Rosarita clinic. The former employee said how he apparently gave Gary and his wife at the time, Dixie, $100,000 to use in order to develop the clinic. However, he claimed that the money wasn't used as intended to develop the clinic, but was rather used for their own personal use. This complaint also claimed that Gary and Dixie essentially stole corporate funds and that they didn't end up giving back insurance payments made to the clinic that were supposed to be given back to the patients. He was ordered to pay $100,000 to the former employee he took the money from. And get this, he even ended up spending about a month in jail that year. And this apparently was relating to a violation of his parole from the 1983 Washington case. Gary was approximately released from jail on July 1st, 1989, and seemed to lay relatively low after that, mainly regarding illegal medical practices. But he most certainly wasn't done with his entrepreneurial endeavors, because it was around that same time when Gary began dabbling in the multi-level marketing, or MLM industry. Sometime in the late 1980s, Gary ended up starting a company named Young Life International Inc. And it was at this company where he would sell products like a thing called Colon Aid and Liver Tone. Colon Aid they described as a combination of herbs, trace minerals, and herbal essential oils which work together to help rid the body of toxins. And Liver Tone being described as essential oils, herbs, and amino acids that work synergistically to provide a highly effective liver detoxification program. He worked on this for a few years and things seemed to be doing just fine for him. However, in 1992, after nearly 10 years of being married and having 2 children, Gary and Dixie ended up getting a divorce. But not too long went by, because it was just that next year in 1993 when he met his 3rd wife, Mary, also known as Mary Billeter Young. Mary was a former opera singer who had experience working at another MLM company called Sunrider International. Sunrider was founded in Orem, Utah in 1982 and is currently headquartered in Torrance, California. It's a company that manufactures various herbal, health, beauty, food, and household kind of products. Mary worked here, and it was said that she allegedly held herself out as an expert in multi-level marketing. She and Gary met at an expo in Salt Lake City, Utah, and it was after they met when Gary really started going full force into the MLM industry, especially because of Mary's previous experience working and selling things at Sunrider. The two of them got married that next year in 1994, and it was that same year when they started the infamous MLM company, Young Living Essential Oils, which is a company that definitely has a lot of controversy surrounding it, which we are going to get into. On the Young Living website, they claim to be a world leader in essential oils and wellness solutions, and they're said to produce the best, most authentic essential oils in the world, which, based on how large the company grew, it is clear that they are one of the top essential oil companies in the world, and one of the top MLMs as well. Gary was actually first introduced to essential oils in 1983, apparently by a Swiss woman named Anne Marie. Mary Young claimed that while in Mexico, Anne Marie brought her sick sister to Gary's research center and was like, "Hey, my sister's sick. I have some ideas on what may help her. Have you heard of essential oils?" And Gary was like, yeah, I mean, I've done aromatherapy, but I'm not that interested in it. They're pretty much perfume oils. That was when Anne Marie apparently explained how the essential oils bought in the stores are the ones that are the perfume oils, but that when they're authentically grown, as she described, like the herbs he grows, that they truly work for aromatherapy. And so she gave Gary an envelope with information regarding essential oils. Supposedly because of this, he had this new spark and he wanted to embark on this essential oil journey. On a page listing his achievements, it stated that 7 years later, in 1990, he began studying oil distillation in southern France. That it was 1992 when he and Mary finally started their first lavender farm in St. Mary's, Idaho, and that in 1994, it was when he completed his oil distillation studies to then officially start Young Living Essential Oils that same year in 1994. And they did grow to become a very large empire. They have locations all over the world on 6 different continents in over 30 countries. They have websites in 70 different countries, and they have farms all over the world as well. Reported in 2020 that they've grown to 6 million members, 23 corporate and partner farms worldwide, more than 3,000 employees, and over $1.5 billion in annual sales. And in 2021, the Global 100 list of world's top MLMs ranked Young Living 7th, bringing in $2.2 billion in annual revenue. And they also just collaborated with multiple celebrity endorsers. They say that their mission is to be able to heal people through the use of oils. A lot of people were claiming that these oils did in fact help heal them of their ailments. People were using it in place of their usual cleaning products. Some parents even said that they stopped their children's doctor prescribed medications to use these oils in place and said that their health has never been any better. And they built a very large fan base of people who were all for the mission. They even had an annual 4-day convention dedicated to the teachings and message of the company. Tickets for this convention costed about $250, and in 2019, more than 32,000 people from across the world traveled to attend this convention. Now, just to give some insight on what a multi-level marketing company is, it essentially is a type of company which utilizes a selling strategy where existing members are encouraged to not only make sales, but to recruit others to join the company, to then have those who are recruited make sales and they recruit others to join the company. So kind of just keeps going. Young Living uses this technique, which creates a kind of hierarchy with 10 different levels. In order from lowest to highest, these levels are named Associate, Star, Senior Star, Executive, Silver, Gold, Platinum, Diamond, Crown Diamond, and then the highest, Royal Crown Diamond. In their company, associates were said to make up 89% of their staff, whereas Royal Crown Diamond were less than 0.1%. A lot of the time with MLMs, distributors end up buying more products than they're able to use or resell, and they do this in order to stay active in the company or in order to qualify for bonuses or rewards. A lot of members, especially distributors, do have these hopes that they are going to be making these sales or earning these rewards, when that in fact is not even a reality for most of the members. It was reported that in their 2022 income statement that associates, being a whole 89% of their members, only make an average of $3 annually, with the median being $0. While those at the top, i.e. Gary, was bringing in quite the fortune. Royal Crown Diamond members make up less than 0.1% of members, and their average income in 2022 was $1,684,354, with the median being $1,469,339. A former employee said that Gary and his family were living in a $1.3 million, 10,000 square foot mansion in Utah. He spent a lot of money on rebuilding. He had a bunch of private jets and would do lots of trips across the world buying properties. He had some horses, and he would even spend money doing a lot of random projects, including an armory where people made suits of armor, medieval clothing, and a jousting arena. This especially because the essential oils on the website come at quite the hefty price. The lowest price of oils listed on the website are tied at $14.80 US for a sample of lavender essential oil or for a sample of peppermint essential oil. And the highest amount is $282 US and 57 cents for rose essential oil. They also sell various personal care items, accessories, supplements, just all of that. So he would be making a lot of money, while distributors who were at the lower ranks would be spending a lot of their own money on products just for them to make nothing at all. But not just this, he was also still facing some legal issues regarding the treatment plans taking place in his clinics. On August 17th, 2000, there was even an investigation after an employee of Young Living had passed away from an equipment explosion on one of their farms. This employee was named Juan Gomez. He was 44 years old, and this happened on a 1,000-acre farm located in Mona, Utah. Young Living Farms was fined for a total of $10,280 for 7 safety violations, and a lawsuit was filed against Essential Botanical, which Young Living was a registered DBA under. And although the lawsuit was later dismissed, this still is something that obviously raised concerns. That same year, in 2000, Gary opened a research clinic in Springville, Utah, and this clinic was called the Young Life Research Clinic Institute of Natural Medicine. At this clinic, he sold his essential oils while also offering various alternative medicine treatments to those suffering from different ailments or diseases. And just 4 years after starting this clinic, an employee who worked there was charged with practicing medicine without a license by doing diagnostic tests and prescribing products to patients at the clinic. It was said that from October 2000 up until May 2002, this employee was using kinesiology to examine patients, and despite not having a license to do so, she was diagnosing and treating them. Some of these diagnostic modalities included blood analysis, and she was prescribing the use of essential oils to treat various physical and mental health problems, in addition to offering colonic therapy while referring to herself as a master herbalist. And this was especially problematic after a patient at this clinic had a tragic outcome afterwards. There was a patient who had been diagnosed with throat cancer in November 2000, and he came into the clinic hoping to get treated over there. He first came in to the clinic in April 2001, and he was seen by a person named Dr. Sherman Johnson, as well as the master herbalist. The master herbalist ended up analyzing this patient's blood samples, and after her analysis, she diagnosed him with bowel problems, stress, and a parasite problem, saying that his liver was overloaded, his red blood cells were clumped together, and that he had gaps in his blood cells, indicating an emotional problem. And she even conducted muscle tests on him, saying that this would help evaluate his circulation and see if he had any neurological issues, phosphate issues, or toxic stomach. And in doing more of these tests, she found that he had a virus in his neck and attributed it to either being a parasite or something chemically related. So now that she had these things she diagnosed him with, she began to provide his treatment. And some of this consisted of a treatment called the Raindrop technique. This is a technique Gary came up with. He actually wrote a book about it titled The Raindrop Technique in 2003. It essentially entails using a sequence of 9 essential oils and massaging it on different parts of the body, typically on one's feet and spine. And it's described in the book to have all types of antiviral, antibacterial, and anti-inflammatory benefits. However, it's still a questionable technique as the practice raises concern for issues like skin irritation, and there's no evidence backing up whether the practice works or not. The National Association for Holistic Aromatherapy actually released a statement regarding the Raindrop technique, saying that they do not condone the indiscriminate use of such essential oils, and the practice has even been banned in some European countries, including Norway. Not only did she do this, but she also made him put his feet in a copper bowl to remove parasites, and she prescribed very high doses of vitamin A, C, and E to be administered intravenously, while also prescribing essential oils from Young Living to supposedly alkalize the patient's body. This patient stopped going to the clinic in June 2001, so he only stayed for about 2 months, and not even a month after his last treatment there, he had to undergo a surgery relating to the cancer he had. And not even a year later, on February 23rd, 2002, this patient actually passed away from his condition. This is just one case of the many cases of patients with real serious diseases being falsely diagnosed and treated by people who didn't even have the license to do so, but also didn't treat them with real medicine. Not only this, but the clinic was found to have employed a pediatrician whose medical license was previously suspended after being convicted of manslaughter relating to a cancer patient who passed away in his care due to improper treatment. And just 3 years later, after their employee was charged, in 2005, his Utah clinic was even hit with a lawsuit after a patient nearly suffered kidney failure due to being given too much vitamin C at his clinic. Even though this lawsuit was settled, it must have been enough of a hit because he ended up closing down that clinic in Utah to open up a new one in Guayaquil, Ecuador, called Nova Vida Medical Clinic. And there had been many complaints regarding the side effects from these oils. FDA reports from 2013 to 2014, some patients claimed that the oils caused high blood pressure, a severe rash, vomiting, and hives, with one report claiming a woman was placed in a drug-induced coma after using these oils. Granted, yes, anyone can have an adverse reaction to anything. It still is worth noting that this was the experience of some people who have used the oils, and therefore it could be be an obvious concern for anyone else, especially because in September 2014, the FDA issued a warning letter to Young Living stating that the company was using their products to advertise in the treatment of various viral infections, including Ebola, Parkinson's disease, autism, diabetes, hypertension, cancer, insomnia, heart disease, post-traumatic stress disorder, dementia, and multiple sclerosis, letting them know that they have no business advertising their products as being able to treat these conditions, which they said to be conditions that are not amenable to self-diagnosis and treatment by individuals who are not medical practitioners, i.e., Gary Young or whoever working at his clinic. It appeared that these comments weren't on the Young Living website, but instead on a brand partner's website, which is why the FDA sent them this warning letter that they should take prompt action to correct the violations cited in this letter. In 2017, they even ended up facing federal misdemeanor charges after the illegal trafficking of certain oils from endangered species. They were caught illegally trafficking rosewood oil and spikenard oil, and after pleading guilty, they were actually fined $760,000 in restitution and community service payments for doing this. In fact, in April 2019, a former member filed a proposed class action lawsuit accusing the company of running an illegal pyramid scheme. In this lawsuit, they actually alleged that Young Living operates an illegal pyramid scheme created under the guise of selling essential oils for quasi-medicinal purposes. In truth, Young Living is nothing more than a cult-like organization falsely peddling the ever-elusive promise of financial success and an alternative lifestyle. Young Living denied these claims, saying, "Young Living disputes many of these claims as outdated, misleading, or exaggerated. These allegations simply do not reflect the company that Young Living has evolved to be today," instead referring to events that happened years and even decades ago to provide an inaccurate and sensationalized view of Young Living. This suit was later dismissed in 2021 as they couldn't find enough evidence. However, in 2022, the FDA again sent a warning letter to Young Living for posts that were falsely advertising and marketing their products as unapproved new drugs and misbranded drugs. This included some posts for their products named Essential Oil, Vitality, Ninja, and Nature's Ultra CBD. For example, a blog post from their website, naturesultra.com, stated, quote, "Some studies suggest the most common illnesses caused by an improperly functioning ECS are depression, Alzheimer's, IBS, fibromyalgia, and even migraines. CBD is a great way to support your ECS." And there was even a post that was not on their website, but on a blog post from one of their members saying, quote, "For new moms, apply 1 drop daily of Frankincense essential oil to the umbilical cord stump on your newborn until it falls off." Even though this post was on another website, the frankincense oil did again bring up how Gary related religion a lot to his practices and products. Business Insider reported that a former employee claimed that mothers were handing over their babies and he was allegedly anointing these babies with frankincense oil backstage at his convention. And this was because frankincense oil was used in the Bible as a component in worship.
In the Bible, there are 188
Frankincense
references.
and myrrh.
Yes, of just the references in the Bible on essential oils, formulating blends for the healing of the sick. Frankincense, referred to as the holy anointing oil. This frankincense, because every time they applied it to one of their sick people, the person was well almost instantly. Frankincense was the most prized possession in the entire world at that time.
He even sold an oils of ancient scripture set for over $200 that included 10 of the most significant oils from the Bible, and seemed to believe that he was on a mission from God to bring essential oils to the world. But anyway, to get back onto what we were talking about, these posts were just 2 posts of the many that were included in the report that these products had the ability to help out with whatever ailments. So on July 22nd, 2022, Young Living made a statement explaining the situation, that a lot of the posts that were made weren't recent, and that a lot of these posts were made by a brand partner and not them, as a lot of members of Young Living do believe that the products can heal various types of illnesses even though it can't. So Young Living as a company, regardless if they agree or not, they know all the legal issues Gary had gotten into with making false medical claims like this. So if members do continue making posts about all these medical benefits and the FDA find out, they most certainly have to make a statement like, hey, these posts go against our policy, otherwise they'd be getting into some more trouble. But as you can see, there seem to be a lot of issues going on with this company or with their members. Now, in my opinion, and I'm not a medical professional, so nothing I'm saying should be taken as medical advice whatsoever, just putting that as a disclaimer out there. But in my opinion, I think using natural products like essential oils is fine as long as it's done safely, as long as it's done under certain circumstances, and as long as it's not claimed to help treat medical conditions. For example, if I have a little ache that's nothing severe and I personally feel as though peppermint oil would help me soothe that ache, I'm going to use peppermint oil to soothe that ache. If that's for me, if I want to do that. If I'm nauseous and ginger helps me feel not nauseous, I'm going to take some ginger for myself. I'm not anti-essential oil. I actually love using essential oils. I think they smell nice. I like using them in my hair products. They feel nice to me. I have no issues with the sale of essential oils. But that's coming from a non-medical standpoint. That's just coming from an I like essential oil standpoint. However, if somebody has cancer, if somebody has a degenerative disease that requires certain medications in order to treat it, if somebody is facing some weird symptoms and they're getting concerned for their health, they need to go to a doctor. Essential oils is not healing cancer, sorry to break it to you. But a lot of members or those who are fans of Gary seem to believe that essential oils or these alternative medicine treatments are useful in treating such conditions, when that's just not the case. Now, just to backtrack, because that last letter was sent in 2022, Gary ended up actually passing away on May 12th, 2018 at the age of 68. That was just 3 years after he stepped down as CEO of Young Living, appointing the role to his wife, Mary. Now, Mary claimed that Gary passed away due to complications from a series of strokes. But what's interesting is that one of Gary's sons, Sean, from the marriage with Donna Jean, claimed that Gary didn't pass away from a stroke, but that he instead passed away from cancer. Now, this is obviously unfortunate. Cancer is never something I would ever hope somebody would pass away from, nor is a stroke, especially at the age of 68, considering the average life expectancy in the States for men seems to be around mid-70s. And I obviously have no way of confirming how he passed away because I, of course, wasn't there. However, it would be very interesting if it was in fact cancer that Gary passed away from, because Gary's whole thing, his whole brand, especially as he was coming up, was that he could heal someone who had cancer as long as they followed these alternative treatment plans that he had. So for him to allegedly pass away from cancer, this would be a very ironic twist. And it would be no surprise if they were trying to keep this hidden, because it would kind of look bad on his brand that maybe he didn't have the cure after all. The story behind when he did pass away is quite sad, especially regarding his children from his previous marriages. His sons, Matthew and Sean, described that when Gary was succumbing to his illness over the few weeks, neither of their two brothers that were in Utah, which were the sons that Gary had with Mary, that none of them contacted them to come see him before he passed away. Sean even said, quote, "Mary is such a shady person that she would rob us of the opportunity of being with our dad the last few moments. I think she lied to the public because of the way they claimed Young Living can fix everything. She was worried it would ruin Young Living." This whole story appeared to be a case of a person who wanted to be a medical legend, somebody who knew so much in the field and had the tools and treatments necessary to heal people, when in reality, he wasn't qualified or licensed to be diagnosing people, nor medically treating people with serious diseases or with anything at all. And it's interesting that he not only created so many clinics and products, but just how much the company of Young Living has grown with such strong support from members. Like, many members who have left the company described the strong hold it had on them, to the point where some were even describing it as cult-like. Now, obviously, everyone has the right to make the choice for themselves if they want to follow a certain kind of treatment protocol or not. People have the right to decline treatment from medical professionals, and people are allowed to take whatever legal product they want for themselves. But what people are not allowed to do is pretend to be a doctor and take advantage of those who are truly sick and need medical help. While some of his patients might honestly have just genuinely been anti-medicine to the very end no matter what, there probably were some that were just genuinely desperate. Some that were dealing with chronic illnesses or ailments could have honestly tried everything they could do medically with real doctors to try to get a solution to their problems. Especially when dealing with very serious problems like cancer, it's a very vulnerable time, and I'm sure especially for the patients from his earlier clinics, following his treatments might have truthfully been their last hope of surviving. He had and still has a large fan base. People really enjoy his teachings and often deem him as credible, especially when looking at all the books he wrote and certifications he claimed to have. Which is why it's unfortunate that so many people were pretty much taken advantage of at their lowest points to be treated by someone who wasn't qualified and was often using ineffective or absurd methods to do so. And from everything I've learned researching this case, it's clear that he was a driven man. He had a rough time growing up, started from nothing, but was very passionate. It just would have been nice if he put this drive that he had towards legal things that would have truly helped others. If you really want to treat people medically, continue your pre-med classes and go to med school. If you wanted to practice alternative medicine, cool, that's your prerogative. But if he's doing that, he should have made sure to, number one, use safe methods only, and two, do it in a way to complement true medicine, as opposed to making alternative methods the end-all be-all. It also just makes me think about how he and his staff were diagnosing people with different diseases, and how many of the investigations showed that the diagnoses they were giving were just false. It makes me wonder if they genuinely thought that the diagnoses they were giving were true, or if they were diagnosing people with things at random in order to get a check, especially with these hefty prices they had patients paying for these 3-week detoxification programs and whatnot. Though considering everything discovered in this case, honestly, the latter seems to make the most sense. There was just so much potential to do something great to help others, but that just unfortunately didn't seem to happen in this case. Today, Young Living is still up and running and is still doing well as a company. It was just interesting looking into the history of how it all came about and the history of the man who started it all. But yes, that is it for today's video. What do you think of this story? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And a huge thank you for 100k subscribers. I seriously cannot thank you guys enough. I'm so grateful for all the support that I've gotten in the past 6 months of having this YouTube channel, and I'm just excited to continue growing and posting with you all. And a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. Y'all are the best, and I seriously appreciate all of the love. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any other stories involving medical cases, crime, and mysteries. Bye now.